This is the Vajra region, Ursul Tenzin, seminar entitled Meditation in the Three Yanas, held at Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado. This is talk number 2, June 14th, 1979. This is an ARP digital remaster made November 2007.
We could continue with our discussion. We were talking about Dharma, and we mentioned that Dharma, the definition of Dharma, is twofold. First, ordinary Dharma, which is like the wetness of water or the hotness of fire, that kind of ordinary experience of things. And then we talked about higher Dharma, which is involved with the truth. And in talking about the higher Dharma, we said it had two qualities. One is passionlessness, and the other is the quality of waking us up. So that is the definition of a higher Dharma. So we're involved in this particular course of tuning into that higher Dharma, or the truth, so-called truth. And how we do that, according to tradition and the experience of practitioners that have done so, is by the practice of meditation. And the word practice is very important to us in this course, because we're not strictly dealing with theory here. Our tradition is that of the Kagyupas and the Kagyu lineage, as you know. And that lineage is called the practice lineage. And what they have taught and passed down is based on their own experience of the practice of meditation. So aside from these talks that we have, our main study, so to speak, is to practice meditation. In this course during the summer. It is necessary to stress that point again and again and again. That unless we ourselves experience what we're talking about, then we treat our lives like something that is foreign to us. Something we heard about, read about, heard rumors about. Our life becomes something that is inferred, or something we refer to as outside of ourselves. So, this course is involved with application, practical aspect of being who we are. Which brings us to our topic for tonight, and that is, how do we find out about this so-called higher Dharma? And how do we find out the nature of this truth we're talking about? The main point is that we have to cease relying on experts to fill in the gaps when we feel confused, or lazy, sleepy, when we feel like we're willing to avoid anything that occurs in our life, when we feel we're willing to avoid that, we usually wait for the experts or fill in the gap with some kind of quotation. So-and-so said. But what we're talking about here is that we can actually find out for ourselves. And in fact, unless we do that, unless we find out for ourselves, then we continue to live our lives in petty fashion, confused and worried, or puffed up and arrogant. So finding out for ourselves means that we are willing to make one statement, that from this time, once and for all, we're going to clean up our own mess. We're not going to rely on the experts. And experts in this case could be Maytag or STP. Your friendly shell dealer down the street. There are all kinds of experts, all kinds of help we could have in not tending to our own life. It's so easy. Just to flip a switch. But when we consider that, we have to think about the fact that most of the time we actually distrust ourselves, that we can't handle our own life. It's much easier to plug in to something that seems like it's already there for our benefit. So, what we're talking about is that we're actually going to take the time, at this point, practically speaking, take the time to look at things as they are. If there's a mess, then we're going to take a look at that mess and clean it up for ourselves. For the most part, we have no choice. We can, of course, accept the views of the experts. We can continue to fill up all the dirty spots, all the mess. Just if there's a little stain on the cloth, put a plant on top of it. Put something on top of it and continue to do it that way. If the drape is ripped, put another one on top, or paint over with acrylic crayons, something. So, continuing what we discussed last time, this process of finding out about Dharma through the practice of meditation is called the development of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness involves those two aspects we talked about, higher Dharma, and that is passionlessness and waking up. Passionlessness evolves through the practice of meditation, the breathing practice we talked about last time, which is called the development of peace, shine in Tibetan, shamatha in Sanskrit, which basically means holding still, being still rather, not holding still, being still, which is the same thing as making the commitment to take the time to look at things as they are. And that is related to what Vajracharya talked about as synchronizing body and mind in the first talk. And that is basically letting body and mind be as they are. And being awake is also an aspect of mindfulness. In that, having first letting ourselves be as we are, letting body and mind be synchronized through the breathing practice, then actually looking to see what's there, finding out what occurs in our experience. Finding out how body and mind work together. So we're back to that point. We don't have to read Gray's Anatomy particularly, or read about our experience of sensory awareness and touchy-feely, and everything that goes on that people try to do to figure out how we are, who we are, what we are. All kinds of gimmicks. The point here is just to sit, let the body and mind be, and then take a look at what happens when body and mind actually are what they are. Just take a look at what happens. That's the development of mindfulness. So in doing so, we have 4 aspects involved in the development of mindfulness, which is a mindfulness of body, mindfulness of survival or livelihood, those words interchangeable there, mindfulness of effort, and mindfulness of mind. Those are the aspects of mindfulness that develop as we sit, as we practice. In terms of mindfulness of body, it begins when you sit on your cushion. Mindfulness of body is very simply the mindfulness of being. That's a very interesting word, being. At this point, what we're talking about is, as we said, just letting things be. Breath, discursive thought, bodily sensations, as we talked about last time, let them be. Go out with the breath, let it go out. And breath being both mind and body at that point, and going out. So when we talk about mindfulness of body, we're talking about sense of being without any kind of qualification. Any kind of addition at all. Just feeling, sense of being. Not being anything particularly. Not even being a meditator particularly. A Naropa student, a doctor, whatever, a divorcee, a stockbroker, a rich person, a poor person, a neurotic person or a sane person, just being. Sense of being. That relates to feeling one's body on the cushion, being right there. So that sense of being is a kind of basic statement of mindfulness of body. We're not talking about relating to anything else except just being on your cushion. When you sit, when you first sit down to practice meditation, even before the gong rings, you sit, adjust yourself, your posture, not too loose, not too tight, your head and shoulders erect, sense of being, right there. That's the beginning of mindfulness of body. And that mindfulness of body is confirmed by the actual practice itself, breathing practice. Because breathing, as we talked about last time, is a very simple process. It doesn't depend on anything. And that's the real sense of body. That the basic bodily function that we associate with being alive is breathing. If you think a person's dead, you check to see if they're still breathing. So, it's kind of very ordinary. Uncomplicated. And that breathing process, breath, as an experience of a sense of being, is how we practice mindfulness of body. Just feeling your breath go out is the experience of mindfulness of body. That is, that we have nothing to refer to, nothing to do exactly. Because you can't say that you actually do breathing. You breathe. That's what you do. But you don't do it. It just happens. Breath goes out. And that brings us to the next point, in this case, of mindfulness of body. And that is that you have nothing to do. This is very fundamental to the practice of meditation, to realize from the very beginning, when you sit and practice, you have nothing to do. Nothing whatsoever. You're just breathing. Breath's going out. And that points to the experience of being exactly as you are. That being exactly as you are is not dependent, again, on any kind of a reference point, any kind of expert, any kind of manual, which totally establishes one sense of dignity, one sense of intelligence that you just can be simply. So that's how the technique works. Breathing technique works with the mindfulness of body. But on the other hand, that experience could be very irritating to a lot of people. The fact that there's nothing to do could be very irritating. Could produce all sorts of restlessness. We could say that that experience is a simple statement of the confidence, dignity of who we are, very simply. On the other hand, it seems that we have a lot of stuff stored up. So when we get this instruction of how to meditate and actually start doing it, we begin to call out for all kinds of experts to come and help with the fact that we're bored and we think we should have something to do. And there isn't anything to do in this practice. I hope you know that. Well, you'll find out if you keep on going with this course. There isn't anything to do. So all kinds of irritations begin to arise. It's a very fundamental thing. We're talking about now how we actually avoid the experience of mindfulness of who we are, what we do, how we do it. How we actually avoid that. By filling up everything that is boring or tedious, repetitious, monotonous, like this talk. With some sort of project. Some sort of expertise of some kind. Somebody's quotation. A memory. That's all we need, is a little memory. Sitting, practice, a little memory of, remember? Fills it up. Pretty good. But not for long. Doesn't work all that long. So what we're talking about here is the basic dignity of who we are, sitting on a cushion, mindfulness of body as it is. Just being here. But that irritation also brings us to the second aspect of mindfulness, which we call that aspect is the mindfulness of survival or livelihood. How that sense of being continues. While you sit and you're practicing, relating with the breath, and breath goes out, all kinds of irritations begin to arise. Bodily irritations, thought process, discursive thoughts, all kinds of irritations come up in your practice. That seems to, from the ordinary sense, disturb that sense of being. From the ordinary sense, when you think about it, what we would like is some kind of ideal state. Perfect state where nothing disturbs nothing. Everything is just fine, no problem. But something happens. You may sit down on your cushion and set up very properly. Everything feels good, straight, head and shoulders. And maybe after 3 minutes, which is saying a lot, something begins to tick at you, gnaw at you. And you think, it's my knees. I know I never should have started this because my knees are bad. And of course this is going to happen, so this is ridiculous. Sense of being goes out the window. That's ordinary logic. Or you're a really good sitter. Body is fine. You can relate, you can sit there, relate very good. Sitting is great. My body, I'm fairly healthy. I can sit. But your thoughts begin to disturb you all the time. I can't continue to sit here. I feel fine, but I can't continue to sit here because everything's so irritating about, well, all these other people, or my mother, whom I haven't called, or any kind of thing begins to irritate you. Or maybe it's a fly. That you're sitting perfectly straight. Good. Feel that sense of being, and the fly lands on your nose. And suddenly, what? There's something else. And you begin to feel irritated, slightly. Things start to come up. Well, that irritation, basically, is involved with one's sensual perception, sense consciousness. We have, we talk about 6 senses here. 5 being ordinary senses, and 6 being mind, that which recognizes the other 5, smell, taste, touch, etc. That those things that occur during your meditation practice, sense perceptions, are either regarded as irritation, or in this case, we're talking about that sense of mindfulness of ongoing liveliness, ongoing survival of being alive. Now, survival, we're not talking about any sense of putting a gun at somebody's head. We're talking more in terms of Darwinian, not Darwin. Darwin. Well, we could be talking in terms of Darwin as well. Is he here? We have a Darwin here? No. But some people know him. He's surviving. In terms of, evolutionary process of going on, continuing. I don't want to make a big trial out of this. What's that famous trial with the Snopes? Yeah. No, I'm not talking about that. What we're talking about here is that actually there is some validity to that notion of ongoingness, survival, sense of survival. And we're not talking about survival from the point of view of somebody pushing us from behind. We're talking about a sense of well-being. Well-being. Not just, first we have a sense of being relating to body. Now we're talking about a sense of well-being. That sense of being is perfectly fine. And it continues. Why? We get back to those 2 points of passionlessness and awake. When we talk about mindfulness, we're talking here that this sense of irritation that arises in our practice is mindfulness of the ongoing quality of being, sense of being. Instead of taking it, as we ordinarily do, as some kind of intrusion on our life, that what we actually experience in terms of knees hurting, a fly on the nose, whatever, atmosphere in the room, it's too hot, all the things that occurs in one's sensual environment, sense perceptions, are actually seen, can be seen as ongoing sense of being. Ongoing, continuing, surviving, liveliness, life. So we're taking a completely different outlook when we practice. You should actually remember this, because you're going to be sitting a lot. You should actually remember this. This is very important when you practice. That we're not talking at all about disease. Okay? That what happens in your practice is not disease. Something pain in your knee or something like that is not disease. Not something you should actually get rid of quickly by cutting off your leg. It's something that occurs which actually wakes you up. And the passionless quality is the sense that it doesn't refer to any kind of expertise. It's actually what you experience. We don't have to rely on anything there. There's no sense of grasping for some kind of explanation why we have a pain in the knee, why there's a fly on my nose. You don't have to ask anybody that. It's actually there. It points out that we're actually awake, experiencing that. It sounds very simple-minded, but it's true. How many times we miss that whole thing of the fly? Just, this kind of experience. Just get rid of it. You're sitting in your big meeting with people you would like to impress. You'd like to sell them this little piece of real estate there and make a killing on the whole thing. And a fly comes around, and you've been doing your presentation so well, and the fly comes and you go, and it suddenly lost it. You have to get, some sense of confidence back because of the fly. That's true. So this particular mindfulness we're talking about is that you actually can be with whatever occurs and actually see it as a sense of ongoing being. When that's ongoing, we have what we call well-being. Well-being means we're comfortable in that. We're at home in even irritation. It's nobody else's irritation, it's ours. We can't have a campaign because a fly landed on our nose to put away all the flies. Death penalty for flies. Continually, because one landed on us. Now, this is very interesting because, as you know, there has been a recent article in what's called the Harper's Magazine. You might have heard of that. And if you didn't, you should read it. It's very interesting. That Buddhists, especially those at Naropa Institute, are very naive people. They sort of follow any hotshot that comes along and that promises them something. And they just sort of toddle along and follow spiritual obedience. What we're talking about here in regard to Mr. what's his name? Marin. Spiritual obedience. We're talking about actually through our own individual practice, taking responsibility for every moment, everything that occurs in our life. There's nobody, no guru that can save you from the fly or from the pain in your knee. So if we take fundamentally talking about any kind of obedience to anything outside, then I think we have something to talk about with Mr. Marin. Our practice is talking about mindfulness of things as they occur. Very simply. Taking responsibility ourselves for everything that occurs in our life. And that begins with just simple practice of breathing, sitting, feeling one's body and breath going out, and feeling that which occurs as irritation or sense perception as not particularly obstacle, but just actually seeing it as it is, a mindfulness of ongoing survival quality. In that way, we actually can cut through all this nonsense, complete nonsense about the spiritual obedience, all the rest of that hearsay. And we can cut through our own nonsense about being a great meditator and all the rest of it, and what we think we are, by practicing, experiencing an itch, or in this case, might be a violent thought, or a lovely thought, sexual thought, whatever. We can actually experience that as a sense of being awake, rather than as some intrusion that somebody else laid on us. It's very interesting. Beginning of talking to that particular idea, spiritual obedience, which is nonsense, basically. So what we're talking about is no hearsay, none whatsoever. If we're going to go through with this, actually practice this properly, no hearsay. What Vajracharya and I are talking about are simply what the experience has been, and you, ladies and gentlemen, have to find out for yourself, experience it yourself. So any kind of obedience to tape recorder is ridiculous, including your own tape recorder, if I might say, even if I might not say. We are human beings, which is delightful. The third aspect, mindfulness of body and mindfulness of survival, brings a sense of well-being, as we talked about. Being at home with what occurs. But then also, we realize at that point that that sense of being at home in body and mind, synchronized, is not a matter of lying down on the couch and forgetting about everything. Saying, well, now I'm at home, I can just relax and the whole thing is all over. Hardly. When you have that sense of well-being, sense of basic healthiness, dignity of ourselves, then you also have what's called mindfulness of effort, which we could say is the kind of departure, fundamental departure from the conventional approach to being happy. Conventional approach to being happy is once you have the basics. Now, the basics could mean a lot of things. But basically what we're talking about as far as the basics is concerned is when some individual feels that they are actually satisfied, that they have their little resort place for the summer, and they have their good job and respect in the community, and all the rest, whatever it might be. But what happens at that point is people begin to decay, start to fall asleep. That sense of passionlessness is very important there because people have passion tremendously when they have a goal. I would like to be the first person of Happiness Heights, California. My business is going well. I have a nice home. I have also a home down in San Luis Obispo, wherever it is, down south. And people respect me. I belong to the Kiwanis and optimists and all the rest of it. At some point, I made my business okay, made my life okay. Then illness, things start to happen. Have to turn over the business. And people start to feel old. That has a lot to do with the mindfulness of effort. Mindfulness of effort is not a matter of trying to pump up, continue that sense of well-being that we feel by sitting in practice. Mindfulness of effort is recognizing that there is actually an ongoing sense of energy or action or effort that occurs in our practice all the time. And it relates again to being awake, sense of Dharma as being awake. When we have body as basically being, when we have livelihood as ongoing sense of being, as being at home, feeling healthy, dignified, good. Then we have effort as any sense of distraction that occurs in that sense of well-being is in itself the effort or the generation of the effort to bring us back. Mindfulness of effort is basically one thing, coming back here. Mindfulness of effort has nothing to do with drudgery or pulling a heavy burden or trying to make things other than what they are. That's an ordinary idea of effort. When you think about effort, people think that I've got to work hard or this thing is going to destroy me. That's the ordinary idea of effort. When we talk about effort here, we're talking about that which occurs spontaneously because of being awake to one's body and one's livelihood. That any kind of obstacle to being awake itself signals, warns, signals, flashes, effort. Brings us back here. I think we're talking about the same thing all through these mindfulness practices and experiences, what actually occurs. But in this case, people have such a problem with how to practice meditation, because there's all kinds of obstacles. And we go to the sitting practice and say, do I have to do this? Can I do this? Do I want to do this? Or we're sitting and practicing, and thoughts arise, and we think, oh, that's awful. Why am I thinking that when I should be just breathing out? Why am I thinking that? Why is it that I have all this problem with just sitting? And then we think, well, I've got to really get down to it. Either that, or I think, I've got to forget the whole thing and get out of here. Sense of effort. How does this sense of this well-being actually spark itself? Well-being sparks itself by mindfulness of effort. That means that whenever in your sitting practice you begin to fall asleep. Now, we have to connect these two from the last one. Mindfulness of livelihood, there's pain in your knee, okay? And because of that pain in your knee, you begin to lose technique, right? You begin to feel that pain in your knee so much that it reminds you of something. Could be anything, by the way. Just simple distraction, such as pain in your knee, reminds you of something. And you start to go away, not be here. But then in a flash, in a very moment, you remember, oh, I'm here. You might have done it for 15, 20 minutes with your thought process because of simple distraction. And suddenly you remember. And when you remember, what happens? What actually happens? If you check out your experience, with the moment you are remembering that you're here, it's not particularly discursive. You don't have to think about anything. You don't have to remember anything in terms of instructions or words or anything. You're just simply, oh, I'm here, awake in the moment. This kind of mindfulness of effort we're talking about is that because of well-being, when you stray from that sense of well-being, that straying itself wakes you up. And you're here again, on the spot, in the moment. You don't have to drag yourself back to the practice, by the way, if you think that's what effort is. You don't have to say, oh, I'm not breathing out. I should breathe out. That's not the point. It doesn't even happen that way. Once you just flash that you're awake and here, the breath seems to be going out, doesn't it? Just going out. So mindfulness of effort is sort of the cornerstone, the key to continuing practice. It's also a sense of actually freeing oneself from any kind of conventional idea of how we struggle, how we try and struggle to be who we are. That's basically what happens all the time. We are struggling to be who we are. When we realize that being who we are doesn't take any kind of force or push, that it happens in a moment, in a flash, we are here again. You see, as you begin to sit, as you continue to sit, that happens all the time. How do you remember that you're supposed to be doing the technique? Who reminds you? Is there the expert voice coming in saying, you should be sitting. You should be breathing out. Doesn't happen that way. Suddenly, you just, oh, it's not even a word at that point. You're just back here. So that kind of mindfulness of effort is kind of the key to the whole thing, how we continue and actually manifest our sense of being free. Free of any kind of conventional logic about relying on this and that to be who we are. So having done so, recognizing that sense of flash and coming back, constantly coming back, gives rise to the fourth aspect of mindfulness of mind, which is, in this case, some sense of completion, feeling completely who we are, that body and mind are totally synchronized, and that we actually know what's going on all the time, very simply. We don't have to ask anybody what's going on with us. Do you see what I mean? Anybody relate to that? We don't have to ask anybody what's going on with ourselves. Because there's complete sense of mindfulness at this point. We bring the whole thing together. We actually see what's going on moment by moment. We begin to become aware of our whole surrounding, our life, what's past, what's present, what's going on. What we project in the future, everything's coming together. This is a feeling of, experience of shine, or development of peace, development of being here. We are aware of a sense of being who we are, how we continue, and where that goes. Just like your thought process. What happens in our thought process, thoughts arise, they continue, and they fade out, dissolve, and that continually happens. And we have some sense of dignity. Human beings, we can experience who we are, what we are fully. There's no mystery involved. And that experience is completely straightforward and honest. Therefore, we don't have to wait for somebody to clean up our mess. We don't have to blame the world or praise the world, for that matter, for who we are. We become decent people, and we don't have to lay a trip on anybody. If you have any questions, we could have a discussion.
When you have the sense of shine, and you're mindful and you're aware of everything that's happening, do you still get, the irritating emotions or whatnot, but you're just aware of what's causing it, or do the irritating emotions stop?
No. You can still have anything that occurs in your experience. The whole process here is what we call irritation generally, is because we have no sense of being, simple being. Therefore, it's always irritation. It's coming from outside, getting us. It's somebody's fault somewhere. But in this case, once you begin to practice and develop that sense of being, well-being, that what occurs usually as irritation is actually part of your practice. You don't have to blame it on anybody. You actually see it as that which makes you awake.
It kind of seems like the study of Buddhism is really just, it's becoming just more and more simple, just straightforward, just being a person, sort of.
That's right. That's why we talk about Dharma here. Buddhism is complicated because it involves one's concepts about religion and whatnot and all that stuff. But we're talking about Dharma, which is experience of things as they are. That's good, yeah, being a person, yeah. Right.
Okay. Your last statement was not laying a trip on anybody. And does that mean, are you saying, like projecting your own negative feelings about yourself on somebody else? Or are you saying that we shouldn't express our anger or towards someone who is affecting our being?
I think more the first one.
Okay, thank you.
The idea of expert is theism.
Yeah?
Thank you.
That's like saying there's only one expert and you, poor saps, will have to make contact with that expert in order to get yourself out of the dumps. Remember the Wizard of Oz? Six of one.
I wanted to ask a question about mindfulness of livelihood. It seemed that when you explained mindfulness of livelihood, you mentioned a notion of distraction, and that being also sort of the messenger of awake.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you talked about mindfulness of effort, you seemed to classify the distraction part of that process as mindfulness of livelihood, and then the bringing back the awake as mindfulness of effort. So it seemed to leave mindfulness of livelihood with just the distraction aspect.
No, we're talking about sense perceptions as well. It doesn't only have to be distraction. You see? For different people, different times, what occurs in the mind, in our sense perception, might be either distraction or go along with your trip. You know, you could be sitting and a smell comes in of flowers from the window and you think that's great. Nice smell, out we go, you know, that kind of thing. It's not necessarily a distraction, but what occurs in the realm of the senses. Well, distraction in any case, but what occurs in the realm of the senses.
If it isn't, let's say it's something that we wouldn't call it an obstacle or distraction, what would be the ground then for mindfulness of effort to occur?
Mindfulness of effort is simply when that sense of well-being becomes confused.
So then the mindfulness of effort would be dependent somewhat on some a distraction or some obstacle or confusion.
Mindfulness of effort is dependent on the distraction?
Yeah, as some contrast.
Well, that's a confused point of view, yeah.
What's a confused point of view?
That effort is dependent on being messed up or fucked up. But it's not. You see, when something goes wrong, say you're practicing, sitting, everything's going right, and then something goes wrong, so we think, how do we get back? Are we dependent on the wrong thing to get back? No. The whole notion here is that when something goes wrong, that in itself is expression of awake. And that expression of awake, that's mindfulness of livelihood, leads to or gives birth to effort. Expression of awake gives birth to effort. That it happens automatically, simultaneously.
I guess my question then is, again, you've described the birth of mindfulness of effort from the notion of mindfulness of awake as something, of awake of in the process of something going wrong or something going off. Does mindfulness of effort occur or have a place in the process when nothing is going off or nothing is going wrong?
What? I never heard of such a thing. You describe to me the state where nothing is going wrong. Love to hear about it. Come on. You have one?
He's saying it's when you don't know that anything's going wrong.
Oh, then something's going wrong for sure. That's that's a different thing entirely. No, you see, the whole point there is when nothing is going wrong and you don't know that anything is going wrong, we go all the way back to mindfulness of body. There's no sense of being.
So would that be saying that some sense of being is related to some sense of confusion?
I beg your pardon?
Well, you're saying that there's implying, I presume, that there's always some sense of something going off or something going wrong.
I didn't imply that. As far as I know.
Well, would you like to describe no sense of anything going wrong?
No. Other than what I've already said. Body, ongoing quality of survival, effort, mind, whole thing together. Nothing's going wrong.
Well, between mindfulness of livelihood and mindfulness of effort, you describe something going wrong. That's
Really?
the way you
think so? You think so?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you should practice more shamatha.
Well, it's not a matter. I'm just following your words that you said.
That's too bad, you see? You must be thinking about a lot of things, which is very interesting for you, my friend. Anybody else? Gentlemen, over here.
When you were talking about the mindfulness of effort, you said that obstacles sort of naturally bring us back to being here and now. Mm-hmm. My question is, when that occurs, is it still important or necessary for us to make the point of seeing thoughts as thoughts?
Yes. Definitely.
Well, if we would do that...
No, here's how it goes, okay?
Okay.
Then, sitting. Goes out, goes out, goes out. Thought. Let's take anything. Roses. Thorns. Mother had a garden. It was nice, it grew. I remember when I was a kid, played in the garden. Goes on. Suddenly, back. Okay? First there's back, then there's thinking. Back.
So in other words, when we come back, there might be just a moment where we would see those thoughts as thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's mindfulness of mind. You see, that's the last one. See those thoughts as thoughts. There's mindfulness of effort, is when you come back, and seeing those thoughts as thoughts is mindfulness of mind. Very good.
Thank you.
Welcome. Very simple. How long have you been sitting?
2 years.
2 years. Some people are sitting a long time, they still don't understand this. Amazing things that happen.
This mindfulness of effort which you're talking about seems unconditioned awareness coming back.
Seems conditioned?
Unconditioned?
Which one is conditioned? It's unconditioned, I'm sorry. Mindfulness of effort.
Yeah.
That's definitely unconditioned.
But still, for that to occur, there is some effort involved. You have to have a setup.
Definitely.
Something.
That effort involved is mindfulness of a livelihood. You see? Mindfulness of survival, the things that go on in your body and mind. That's the effort that occurs. So-called effort. And the effortlessness is mindfulness of effort, how you come back. Definitely. There is some effort you're involved in. Otherwise, why would we be here? Yeah, sure. But the very moment, we're talking about the very moment of coming back is spontaneous. Doesn't depend on anything.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I got you. What exactly is the setup?
Setup?
Yeah.
Body, cushion, room, thoughts, sensations. That's the setup. Memories.
Well, how about the straight back and...
That's body.
Okay.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, okay. It's pretty good. As we said, beginning, this is a practical application of what we have been taught, or has been taught, through our lineage for all this long time. Some of you are seemingly so familiar with it, and some of you are not. But in any case, when you sit on your cushion, everybody's in the same boat. Familiar or not familiar, it's a being and extension of being in mindfulness practice which occurs. Doesn't matter how much you know before you sit down or how much you remember when you get up. Just be. Okay.